We are the sole agent in society that is able to deprive someone of their civil rights. That's an awesome responsibility and is a huge amount of authority. We need to treat that with a proper respect and care.
Hi, I'm Officer Knudsen, and in this episode of the Perspective Project, we're going to cover use of force. Use of force is all over the news right now, and it's a confusing topic. It's generated a lot of questions in our community, and frankly, it can generate a lot of mistrust. I sat down with Lieutenant Almer to discuss our agency's views on use of force, how it affects us, and how it impacts the community. I hope you find this episode helpful. Lieutenant Don Almer, thank you for joining us today to talk about use of force, which is a hot topic issue right now. I think that goes without saying. My goal today is to kind of present some information and let people get beyond the headlines and some of the sensationalism and some of the misinformation, and let people kind of understand for themselves how use of force works. So why do you think that use of force is such a hot topic?
We, the police, have the authority to detain people and basically put on hold people's civil rights, right? So according to our state constitution and the federal constitution, when I make a lawful seizure of somebody, if I stop them on a traffic stop, I'm depriving that person of their civil rights. That's a huge responsibility and an awesome power for folks to have. So society has the expectation that we wield that authority and power in respectful, lawful ways. Part of our job, that's why we're called law enforcement, entails force. And in so doing, not everybody wants to listen or abide by the rules or abide by our commands and things like that. And so officers are subjected to using force that's lawful on those persons. Take a wide view of the entire United States and different laws and different agencies and different events, especially in these times of social media and I think better awareness by the public on those issues. Quickly, be it a news photo or a video or anything can surface where the public will have legitimate questions. And I think in the past, the police profession wasn't so good at explaining our authority to use force, why we use force, how we use force, and things like that.
I definitely feel like the news is portraying that force is used all the time to an extent that I don't think portrays how we normally do our job. And we should establish we can't speak for the entire country and what policing is like in other cities and other states, but for BPD, how would you paint kind of a picture to our average concerned citizen? How often do we use force? Is it an integral part of our job where every day we're going out and laying hands on people?
Use of force actually by the Bellingham Police Department is quite rare. And when I say quite rare, I've done thorough statistical analysis of our data since 2016. 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, the statistical average is, on average, the officers are using force about 0.4% of the time. But let's say if you have 50,000 police calls that our officers respond to, if in those 50,000 police calls we're using force less than 1/2 of 1%. And if we want to really get into the weeds with that, that's just assuming one officer is contacting one person in all those calls. So let's say with those 50,000 calls, we're contacting 2 people on each call. Again, overly simplistic, but
Right.
Now we've had 100,000 contacts with the public, and we've only had to use force 0.4% of the time. People also need to understand that use of force is reactive for us in nature, kind of like the majority of our job. A citizen or somebody will call 911, request the police for a variety of things, and we are going there and we're interjecting in people's lives at just sometimes the inopportune moments, or we're just kind of catching up to a story that maybe has been 2 months to 10 years or whatever in the making. During that moment of intersection, officers have to make rapid fire decision making based on just the information presented to them. And that's where I think And like you alluded to, talking about the media, oh, it seems like force happens all the time. The best way I'd explain it to a high school civics class was, if you lived in a state where there were tornado warnings and tornadoes, and the news ran, hey, here's some tornado coverage. And let's say there were 10 tornadoes in a year, but that's all the news ran. If I came into that state from outside, I'd think tornadoes all the time. So if the news showed, here's out of those 100,000 contacts, 99,000 contacts where nothing occurred, then people will go, okay, and see it for the anomaly it is. But that's not how it gets reported, and that's not how things work.
So all those contacts that we go to where nothing really happens, the person complies, maybe we even arrest them, and they understand, well, I did this wrong, and I turn around, put my hands behind my back. That never makes the news. It's just not newsworthy.
From a statistical perspective, I can get frustrated because I know more of the story. So like our agency uses body-worn cameras, right? So we have our use of force documented on body-worn cameras. So I'm reading reports, I'm seeing that the vast majority of our force is something other agencies don't even report. Our department, the Bellingham Police Department, a use of force is anything that is non-compliant. So even if it's okay, I had to take this wrist, put it behind the back, and let's say there's not much resistance by the person, but there's some, they're not complying to do so, we still document that. So even though the vast majority of our uses of force are things like that, and we have the body-worn camera footage to back that up, and we have the reports and all that documentation that we do and thorough internal reviews and such, all it's going to take is one video of something somewhere else happening, and now people go, wow, Bellingham has X amount of uses of force. It must all be like this, when in fact the inverse is true.
Well, is it fair to say there are people out there who think, well, you can just pad the numbers or omit uses of force, and that's how you get to a 0.4% in all cases is a use of force? How do you answer those people who don't believe the reporting?
My job isn't to make believers. I'm more of an idea person myself. It's very hard to change a person's beliefs. But if we're willing to talk about ideas, then maybe they'll gain that understanding. So usually how I frame this to folks is, they go, oh yes, but that is all based on self-reporting, and your officers just aren't doing it. I'm like, okay, and the body-worn cameras mean what? Right? Or, oh, you're just looking the other way, or this is actually happening way, way more than your numbers show. So Occam's razor, the simplest explanation usually is the explanation. So do you think there's this massive cover-up conspiracy? Like I said, if our use of force is 0.4%, so if we're lying by a factor of 10-fold, our use of force is 4%. So now take those numbers and say, let's say we're only reporting a tenth of what occurred, right? Still 4%. That's very low statistically speaking. So people have their thoughts, and I just know the data presented to me, and having worked here for 20 some years, it doesn't occur like that. So that's all I can say.
Well, we talked before the interview started about what good do we hope comes out of all this criticism. We have a community that really cares and cares about justice, which is why we got into law enforcement, because we care about justice. So I commend them for trying to understand what's going on. But what good do you hope comes out of all this kind of questioning of how we do things?
You use the word that brings a smile to my face, so understand. To do is to understand. I can read about police use of force. I can read about, wow, life moves pretty fast. Well, have you ever been in a situation where you're like, oh, geez, do you know the scientific principles, what's going on? I love that our community asks questions because A, we get our chance to answer. If no one asks questions, we'd be like, okay, right. And just everyone's under the assumption everyone's doing right. We can certainly learn how to do things better from those questions. All I hope is that our citizens and our community also takes the time to go, hey, I see this video, but does that make me an expert on this? Or I know about this, how can I better learn? And we try and do things like give public talks and show demonstrations so people get a better understanding, and to do that, to immerse yourself in that knowledge is really critical. But also I think another part, especially overall, is this is a chance for our citizens and our community to understand we are trying to be on that cutting edge. We're trying to remind folks training is everything. right? The equipment, all the people, that's awesome, but we have to give them time to do is to understand, to cultivate that knowledge and learn those skills. And then also breaking down those barriers. It's not us versus them. We're their police department. I spoke with somebody at a demonstration, and they said, well, we're just going to agree to disagree. I said, that's not enough, right? I can have a position, you can have a position, and you cannot agree with my position, and I cannot agree with yours. Cool. But I would like us to reach that third level of understanding, to where it's like, not only do I know this person disagrees, but I know why they disagree. And what I'm hoping is they understand how my opinion may be different, but they can see where I'm coming from, so to speak. They can understand why I disagree. And I think from that also breaks down a lot of barriers and has a lot better communication. Again, being more of an idea guy than a belief guy, it's easier to change people's ideas than their beliefs.
Deputy Chief Simon and I talked about everybody's tweeting back and forth and yelling at each other on social media. If you care enough to tweet and post and care enough to sit down and get the information, which again was the motivation for trying to put this video series together, we hope that people will at least take the time to understand what we're wrestling with and how we're trying to serve the community and do it to the best. And if there's areas we can improve, we're always trying to do that as well. There's nobody better to talk about this topic than yourself in the department, so I appreciate how much you've committed to being able to explain the topic not only to our officers but to people outside of it. So thank you very much for your time today. It's appreciated.
Happy to help. Thank you.